Okay, I'd like to call the January 13th, 2026 Planning Commission regular meeting to order. The Planning Commission is holding hybrid meetings. Members of the public can attend the meeting in person or observe the meeting on Zoom online by visiting www.cityofarcata.org and following the live meetings link at the bottom of the city's homepage or on the city's YouTube channel. If you are attending remotely, please be aware that the Zoom feed provides the closest to real-time stream. If you rely on the other feeds and you wish to make comments, please be aware of the time lag on those feeds. The first item on our agenda is the land acknowledgement. The City of Arcata acknowledges that the lands we are located on are the unceded ancestral lands of the Wiyot tribe. The land that Arcata rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Gudene, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments remove the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land and threaten to destroy their cultural practices. The City of Arcata acknowledges the Wiyot community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement seeks to aid in dismantling the legacy narratives of settler colonialism. Staff, will you please call roll?
Yeah, Commissioner Ham,
Present.
Commissioner Lehman,
Here.
Commissioner Tagney,
Here.
Vice Chair Strickland,
Here.
and Chair Simmons.
Here. And we are joined by Community Development Director David Loya, City Manager Merritt Perry, and we are also joined by Arcata Fire District Chief Emmons. Thank you for joining us today, Chief. Next on our agenda, we have oral communications. During this time, people may make comments about items that are not on the agenda. If you wish to speak on one of our agenda items, you will have an opportunity when we are discussing those items. If you have comments about items that are not listed on our agenda today, please line up now behind the lectern. If you are on Zoom and you wish to make comments on matters that are not on today's agenda, please raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen, or by pressing *9 on your phone. The clerk will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. With that, I'd like to open public comment. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to comment during early oral communications. Feel free to state your name for the record. And can we have the first speaker, please?
My name is George Green. And what I really wanted to tell you was kind of an interesting story, but also talks about the connection that, we all had with some of the shops and that were impacted by the fire. And thank you. It's kind of interesting. Well, first of all, I had a friend that worked at Hensel's, in the paint store. So he was impacted. And then, but on the 29th, which was just like 4 days before the fire, which I think was on the 2nd on a Friday, I happened to go into Northtown Books, and I've been in there, a bit, they know me. And I bought a couple of books. One of them was Frankenstein, by Mary Shelley, which took place in Bavaria, which is kind of connected with the next thing that I'm going to say. But when I went down from there on the same side of the street, I went into this place, Vanilla Sky, where they have vintage clothes. And I saw in the door hanging up a military uniform. It was a staff sergeant. And I recognized the 9th Infantry Division patch. And I could see that the label said 1946, same year I was born. So I went in. I'd never been in there before, but I went in, and she said that came from New York. Well, I bought it. And I had a good buddy that was in the 9th Infantry Division, and he died of Agent Orange because, dip a canteen in the Mekong River and all that flowed from the north where there was jungles where they sprayed. But anyway, I was curious, and I noticed instead of an infantry patch, the insignia on the lapel, it was military police, and that got me wondering even more. And then there were golden stripes, like 4 of them on the right sleeve. And that amounted like to 2 years overseas service. And then, anyway, I better get going. I did research, and what happened was the connection with Bavaria was that where the 9th Infantry Division was, like in 46 and 47, was at Dachau. So that, I'm glad that I pulled that out of the fire, and I might do something with the Holocaust Museum or maybe something connected. He lived in West Virginia, maybe associated with them. But thank you again. Bye.
Thank you for your comment. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Joanne McGarry, and I appreciate all of you and your volunteer service to the city as planning commissioners. I understand there's a vacancy, and I'm actually still having a hard time hearing some of you, so I asked if you could speak up a little bit. But also, is there someone missing on the commission right now, or is that vacancy the person who's missing? So how many people are on the commission, and is there a vacancy, and what are you doing to recruit somebody for that vacancy? Because I think it's important to have as many people as possible that are allowed on the commission. Secondly, I hope we get a chance maybe to respond to after the fire chief has made his presentation, but I do want to say that the minutes, when I was looking at them, people use abbreviations or acronyms, and then you go to find out what does this all stand for. And I know that people on the dais and people on the staff kind of know what they're talking about, but for those of us who want to understand what's being talked about, spelling things out would be wonderful. And I also just want to say that this fire is sort of a wake-up call to me, and hopefully to others, in how we design our communities better. And as I've said before at other gatherings about post-fire, the old and the new construction are both challenges currently for the fire district, and for those of us really wanting to know how we can make our community more livable and safe and sane. And that brings me to reminding you that the Regional Climate Action Plan has been approved by the county, and I don't know the rest of the processes, but moving forward, we're really going to need to do what we can to design our community with that climate action plan mandates in it. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. David, do you mind just answering the question about the vacancy?
Yeah, we have currently 2 vacancies on the Planning Commission. One spot was vacated by Scott, and one position was vacated due to absences by Amanda. And on the 21st, this is going to be part of my communications, but on the 21st, we will be reappointing Amanda Hickey for the commission. And we are still undergoing recruitment for planning commissioner. I'd be happy to talk more about what that process looks like with people afterwards.
Great, thank you. Do we have anyone looking to make public comment online? Great. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to the consent calendar. We have one item on consent, which is to approve the Planning Commission minutes from our regular meeting on December 9th, 2025. Would any commissioner like to pull the item, or do we have a motion?
I'll move to accept the minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. All right. We have no public hearings tonight, so we'll move on to business items. Our first business item is an update on the downtown fire. Can we please begin with a staff report?
Yeah, I'll hand it over to the city manager, Perry, and Chief Emmons to talk a little bit about the fire, and then afford you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. And then I have a couple of follow-up comments that I'd like to make just to start to prime the Planning Commission for what's to come in the future. So I guess with that, I'll turn it over to City Manager Perry, or...
And I think it might make sense to go a little more chronology. The Arcata fire took over the scene, and then we followed up, and so maybe we'll go that way and start with Chief Emmons.
Sure. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. I think it's obviously something, that was a horrific incident for our community, but I'm not sure if everybody's aware of how it transpired. The incident transpired. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon on the 2nd. And if anybody was in town, they remember the wind conditions for that day were pretty drastic. At the peak of the fire, we had gusts at 38 miles an hour with sustained winds right around 20 to 22. Just to highlight how things transpired for it, one of our engine companies from the Arcata station was coming back from medical aid on the south side of town, and they saw smoke downtown. They said there shouldn't be smoke there. It's not the right spot to have smoke, or any spot for that matter. But while they were calling it in on the radio, our Fortuna Command Center, were dispatched by CAL FIRE, was receiving multiple 911 calls on the incident. So they called in the incident, requested a commercial structure fire because they knew the area was all commercial buildings, responded to it, and they had heavy fire already showing from ground to attic space on off the 10th Street side between buildings and into the buildings. That crew, two-person crew, immediately established a water supply and pulled an attack line and tried attacking the fire. The subsequent 2 additional engines showed up as part of the response, and they went to work searching the upstairs apartments and trying to evacuate. While that was going on, Arcata PD officers were going through the commercial spaces and evacuating people that were visiting businesses and such. So everybody went to work immediately. However, with the concealed spaces, void spaces with older construction, I mean, it's pretty common. We expect this fire to spread pretty quickly through things like that, buildings like that, and then to have the wind swirling and pushing fire and everything, it was quite significant fire behavior. I think we were talking about it earlier, how rapidly it spread from one end to the other. And we had folks upstairs fighting the fire, and they were reporting that they were getting knocked down in one room. Next thing you know, there's fire behind them in another apartment, and it was just spreading rapidly. So they started experiencing collapse of the structure pretty quickly into the incident. And we also had you probably saw in the photos and videos that we had 3 ladder trucks. Those were all 3 of the in-service ladder trucks for Humboldt County from one end to the other. They were on scene, and they had the crews from those. One of the crews from the Humboldt Bay Fire truck had gone to the roof, and they were trying to, it's called a strip cut or a trench cut. So they were trying to separate by creating a cut between the buildings to keep it from spreading. And I talked to some of the firefighters, and they said they could actually feel the floor moving, it was actually the roof underneath them. It was moving and shaking from the pressure from the fire, and they knew it was time to go at that point. I've seen a video where they were coming down the ladder and the roof was caving in as they were coming off that. As far as the mutual aid resources, being in a rural area, we called for resources immediately, from CAL FIRE Trinidad all the way down to CAL FIRE Wiat and everything on the 101 corridor in between. And Humboldt Bay Fire was able to give us 2 staffed ladder trucks through a recall of their personnel, as well as an engine and 2 chief officers. So they recalled all of their personnel because now we're impacting the mutual aid agencies, because we call it dumping their resources to us. And everybody else in between was doing the same thing. While they were responding, or different agencies were responding, I believe it was Lolita or Ferndale rolled up on a traffic accident down in Tompkins Hill area on 101. So they had to deal with that while they were responding to aid us. We got to the point as an admin team or incident command team, we were having a discussion about, we were concerned we were going to lose the next block with the minor theater. And if it got into that one, we were also thinking about the Pythian Castle and so on, houses up the next several blocks. It had the potential to be a major conflagration. I think the initial actions and aggressiveness of our first 3 engines that got on scene and setting up they tried, we call it an offensive attack. They went up offensive and aggressive on the fire, but it got to the point we had to go defensive and think about the rest of the blocks that were adjacent to it and downwind. So at that point, through talking to Merritt, I requested a couple of excavators to come in, and that was a last ditch effort to keep it from going beyond the block. The buildings were already, a loss at that point, and at that, we were thinking beyond that. We wanted to save the rest of the city to the north, and it was GR Sunberg Inc. and Figus that came in, brought their excavators in, and nobody ever wants to do that. We take it personal. We take it as a loss. But at that point, it was trying to, do the most good for the rest of the community. I have to commend those operators because they're not firefighters. They operated that heavy equipment, got in there. They were eating the smoke while the rest of us are wearing SCBA or air tanks and have masks. And they were in that area putting themselves in jeopardy by breathing the smoke and operating. I mean, granted, we had fire streams out there to try to cool everything down at the same time, but those folks did a tremendous job. We did have partial collapse into the street on the 10th Street side, and I believe we had a little bit onto the alley side and possibly the H Street side. So it was obviously a threat to the rest of the community. I can't thank the community enough for turning out. They were bringing, water, Gatorades, food for the folks that were fighting the fire and putting in all the hard work, and it was just out of the kindness of their hearts doing that. And then all the logistical and support folks from the city public works handling the water issue, because there was a lot of discussion about how we did tax the water system. I mean, no water system's designed to handle 9,000 gallons a minute like we were pumping. So I commend them for making sure we had adequate water. We were pumping everything to capacity. I believe, we spitballed the math, and we're firefighters, so we were crunching it on paper and pencil and paper. And at one point, I think we were right around 2.5 million gallons of water that we put on it. Tragic as it is, the positive out of it was we did make a stop and hold it to that block. And just commending everybody that turned out to support us, police department, city staff, Cal Poly folks showed up to help out. Once we had the main body of fire knocked down, then that's when we began, and I'll turn it over to him, but that's where we began having the discussion about, it was far bigger than what we could handle with our local resources, and that's where we had to look at utilizing county and state resources.
And so really the point at which the city takes over, the fire department handles the threat to life and safety. And so once to life and property, once that threat's gone, then the question is what comes next, right? And so there was a big site. There was a lot of debris that was all the excavator pushed everything into the site to contain it on the site. Some of our primary concerns coming into it were, okay, we put approximately 2 million gallons of water onto a paint store and old buildings, and you could see discoloration of the water going into the gutter, which made it ultimately to the storm drains and to Jolly Giant Creek, to the marsh, Butcher Slough. That was one of our concerns, what's happening off site. So one of the key things that the city did was we deployed BMPs, mostly straw wattles and others, to try to contain what was coming out from that site. Some of the additional things, really just helping to provide support. I will say, through a lot of the relationship building we've had lately, through talking about standards of coverage with the fire department, we've really tightened that relationship with Arcata Fire, Cal Poly, and so it was great for communication during the event. And so being able to fit into that incident response when the fire department had their hands full in helping to get equipment, light stands, bathrooms, things like that, it was nice to be able to have clear communication. And the chief and his assistants did an excellent job of managing the fire in a very calm way. I mean, it's a pretty hectic situation, but I was surprised at, with the skill level people there, how much time they had to think about things, make decisions, and just be methodical without, a crazy hectic. It seemed very controlled and very coordinated. And so I think the communication on this was one of the things that we're all recognizing went very well. So on one side, there was a contamination, what happened, mostly paint. We're in the process of getting inventories from Ace Hardware and trying to ascertain what's there. Emily Sinkhorn, so the next day, that fire was on Friday the 2nd. On the 3rd, we propped up our EOC. We met with folks from County Environmental Health, really to look at, okay, what do we need to secure the site? So things that we did, deploying BMPs, best management practices to control the runoff of stormwater, securing the site, getting fences up to separate the site from, so people aren't getting in there and getting injured. And then one of the things that became really quickly apparent is that the city just didn't have the resources to be able to do all the things that we might need to do with regard to contamination or potentially debris disposal. And so that was one of the primary reasons why we declared I proclaimed a local emergency. Really what that does is it takes the ask to the county, who also looked at the situation in our request, and they found the same thing. We don't have the resources to be able to do the sampling analysis and any cleanup. And so in order to preserve the potential for state resources, we declared the emergency. The county declared, and then it was ratified by the Board of Supervisors and the City Council. And so the primary purpose of that, so we could get, we have the chance to get resources from the state. So far, those resources have been primarily technical resources. So we've been on the Zoom calls and had input from just about every state agency under Cal OES, Cal EPA, DTSC. I mean, there's a long list, and so far they've been providing just technical input, both on what they would like to see from a sampling analysis perspective to ascertain what, if any, contamination would still be present in the creek, and then the creek and the waterways, and then also what would the steps need to be. We've been working with DTSE and Cal Recycle of what is the best way to approach the cleanup of the building. As far as timeline, some of the key things that are happening right now are that the fire district is working on their investigation. And so the site can't be disturbed until the fire department and the insurance companies complete their investigation. If people get inside and start messing with it, even though it's been turned over by excavators and pulled down, it could jeopardize the insurance coverages for some of the properties. And so right now we're in that phase. I believe the Arcata Fire District is fairly close to completing their investigation. And then we expect it would take a little more time for those insurance companies to complete their investigation. So it's really important that those get done. Our hope is that, once those investigations are complete, my understanding is most of the building owners have insurance, and that insurance has some coverage for debris disposal and cleanup. Is highly likely that will cost more than what those property owners have in coverage. And so that'll be interesting to see. It could be unfortunate if they have to use some of their coverage for rebuilding to go towards debris disposal, because it's a significant cost for debris disposal. A lot of it's hard to say what's there, but likely lead, asbestos, some of the product that was in the hardware store. So a lot of that's commingled right now, and the time to separate it might be more, might cost more than it would be to just send it all to a hazardous waste landfill, which is further away and has higher tipping fees. And so we're trying to figure out how we can be helpful in working with contractors to figure out what a cost is, so that we can provide that to the property owner, what an approach would be, and to removing that solid waste and putting some numbers to that. Additionally, we've been talking with business owners. It seems like some of them are in a different space. Some are ready to, hey, where's the spot I want to open back up? And other ones are like, okay, I need to process this and take a little more time. So they're all on their own timeline. But I would say that we've reached out to the property owners, and we're doing our best to support them, and then also to the business owners. I know that there's at least one, talking with the hardware store owner, is that she really wants to move, and there's a good chance that she'll move into one of the adjacent buildings, a fireworker building. She's working to negotiate a lease. And so we're going to be thinking about the things we can do, whether it's expediting a permit or, for the tenant improvements for a space like that. What can we do to get those businesses up and running? We've been suggesting alternative locations and talking with other property owners, just trying to fill in those gaps and provide information the best we can while these investigations are happening. And I think David has some ideas about maybe in the long term how we can approach, helping these property owners and businesses rebuild. So let's see. I think the one thing we should also recognize is community response. The chamber, Pay It Forward, Humboldt made, private citizens, like Chief Emmons said, during the fire, people showed up and were donating. There's been an amazing response. And so There's a number of fundraising websites. So the chamber has put together really one spot where you can go look at all that stuff for people who want to contribute. And they've also been doing some vetting of those fundraising sites to make sure they're legitimate. And one of the, we had a talk with Rotary the other day. They're looking to see how they can get behind it. But, when there was the fires in Sonoma County, there was people who were coming in and, acting like they were creating, funding pages for people who were in need, but then it wasn't the case. So it's really important. It might seem like a small thing, but it's really important. So it was interesting to hear some of those lessons learned from the folks in Sonoma County that, experienced some of those attempts at fraud. So the community support has been huge. I really see the chamber being one to support those businesses who need to relocate and have needs. Pay It Forward Humble is really helping to work with those residents to help them get in there. The Red Cross showed up, and I know there was some immediate relocation of people who lost their homes. There's about 8 apartments and I think 7 businesses. And so Red Cross put people up in Hotel Arcata immediately. So again, great community response, great coordination between the agencies and the city. And I feel like the response went as well as it could have. I don't think it's the outcome anybody wanted, but it's nonetheless, it could have been a lot worse. And so I think that's the victory, is that it didn't spread further to more of the historic buildings in the city. So that'll hand it back to David.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'll add is kind of looking forward into future response and how we assist these businesses and property owners to rehabilitate. My department is coordinating with our community development block grant partners to look at what kind of business assistance there will be. But then we can also do some things locally. A lot of the permitting processes that would require, design reviews or, additional planning processes. I think we're going to have to think carefully about what we put these property owners through in order to ensure that fairly large hole in our community gets filled as quickly as possible, and that they really feel the support, from the city. And so I'm not really prepared at this time, but, definitely want to bring together for the Planning Commission and with the City Council some ideas to really, show that support and figure out ways that we can streamline the permitting, not only on the building permit process where we're making sure that we're processing those permits, but also on the planning side. So more on that later, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. And I guess with that, I'll turn it over for the Planning Commission if you have any questions and to invite public comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. Zoning wise, could they go up to 3 stories on the entire half block?
Yeah, I believe at this point, with the zoning code, the way it's drafted, they could go to 3 stories.
And then the second question is the corner building that formerly was a dry cleaner, I know has been dealing with some hazmat issues. Is this give better access? Might that be part of the process?
Yeah, we met with the engineer who's been working that on some time. This might be one of the benefits that comes from a fire. Not that you really look to a benefit, but they were looking at doing some injection and oxidation, which would have been, not the most effective means of treatment. But if the debris disposal can be removed, then they have the ability to do that remediation or remove soil, which will be much more effective and limit that potential release in the future. They have a grant right now to do the cleanup, and their engineer with EBA Engineering thought that they could modify their I forget what they call the remediation work plan, and to do that direct excavation. And so our hope is if the debris can get out of there by February or March, they can do their sampling, modify their plan, and their grant ends in November. So that could be one of the positive things that comes out of this. And I will say that if they're running up against that grant timeline, we've had input from our electeds, from Adam Schiff's aides to Senator Padilla to McGuire called countless times and is checking in. Chris Rogers, Damon Conley is looking at it, and then also our supervisors. So there's a lot of support. So I think if we run into some kind of roadblock that we can rely on our electeds. I don't know about money, but influence with agencies and maybe grant timelines might be an area they'll be able to help if we get slowed down there.
David, down the road, at some point, would it be useful to have the owners, the business owners and the property owners meet with us in a general meeting to talk about how we can move forward together?
We can certainly consider how best to do that property owner engagement. I certainly don't want to at this point kind of burden them with those kinds of decisions. But, if they're willing and interested in meeting with the planning commission, I think we could try and figure out a workshop style meeting for that.
Do you have any other questions, Peter? Any questions on this side? Go ahead.
Sorry, one brief one. Did you say there's 7 separate parcels, or
Yeah, I think there were 7 separate businesses, I think, and some of those businesses, there were multiple buildings on one parcel.
so do we know how many separate parcels there are?
3.
3 separate total.
Yeah, there's
parcels.
three property owners.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you all kind of covered this, but were there any sort of like lessons learned for future events like this that that you could share?
Everybody wants to jump up and talk about the lessons we learned.
So as part of the incident, when we have a major incident, one of the things we do is an after action. And so I actually just got it scheduled today. And we'll be having an after action of all the agencies involved, lessons learned, what went well, what can we do better. Also recognizing those big gaps that we may have. And then typically what we do, at least at the fire district, is we'll take that and we'll summarize it, and we can have a public discussion if need be on the summary of it.
Just one comment there. One of the things that we were thinking about, of course, when you're fighting a fire like that and you have 9,000 gallons a minute going, you're like, okay, how long can we sustain the water? I will say that we had some great response from our David Case with our engineering department, Scott Lackey with our environmental services utilities crew, but we had full tanks. We had Humboldt Bay on standby, so they were aware of that need, and our tank levels dropped a little bit, but we could have sustained that amount of fire flow indefinitely. What I start thinking about is what happens if it did spread and we opened up that many more hydrants. And so I think part of our discussion or thought process is in the after action will be like, okay, what if this was bigger? Should we be looking at our water system and thinking about how we can get more water to a bigger fire like that? So one area, but we did well there. They could have probably used more water, but we had enough to sustain that, pretty high level of flow for a long time.
And then I would kind of offer lastly that, we've been with the hazard mitigation plan update recently putting more attention and emphasis on trying to bridge the gap between our long-range planning, our resiliency planning, and our hazard mitigation planning. And we literally, like within the last month, had a meeting between, the county, the university, and the city to work on a, emergency operations center tabletop exercise. And so, I would say that, we're also probably not prepared at this point to kind of list out all the lessons learned. But it was an opportunity for, Merit to establish the EOC, in this event. And, luckily it was a fairly small event in terms of, the nature of an EOC. But it gave us, some practical application and practice. And I feel like we had some good lessons learned through that process as well. And I want to reiterate, something Merit said in passing. I really want to put an exclamation point on. I feel like the work that we've been doing, the collaboration with the fire department, the university on the standard of cover, and the work that we've been doing following up on the planning work that we just recently completed to ensure that we're, communicating and building the relationships and working together to, resolve mutual problems, I feel like had a large part in how successful the coordination was on this particular event. So I think that's important to recognize.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from commissioners?
I just want to say I would be really interested in receiving that summary you discussed. And then also thank you for the very clear and concise update. I feel like I learned new things I hadn't heard of before. And also, Merritt, you saying, are you describing all the support the affected people have gives me a lot of confidence in that we know what we're doing. And also your urgency to see that it's all cleaned up as soon as possible to prevent further discharges. So thank you very much.
Great. So with that, I think I should open up for public comment before we move on. I'm going to open up this item for public comment if anyone would like to make a public comment on it. You will have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name's Joanne McGarry, and a couple of things that I observed from a distance because I was homesick, having been on the bus headed down H Street when the fire first broke out, but I decided to go home and stay away. But one of the interesting things, and I just share this with the chief, is on the north-south alleyway between 10th and 9th, on 9th Street, there were two firefighters trying to access this iron gate that didn't have any handle or anything on the outside. And somebody who was familiar with how to get into that area came over and put a hand over it and pushed the gate open. And I don't know, it was an interesting phenomenon that they were trying to access that alleyway and there wasn't an easy way for them to figure out, and I don't know what they were going to try and do, but that is an interesting design. I just wanted to say that in terms of access for emergency personnel, they didn't know how to access that. And I also think that when I look at the footprint of the destruction from that corner, and I think about the future and such, you know, I actually went down to the North Coast Environmental Center to ask about their plot of land that is still being detoxified after many, many years of fire there on 9th Street, where the Merino fire took place and the efforts that they're trying to make to clean that site. And then other people talking about other sites that maybe were they cleaned successfully or not, for the toxic soil. And I just want to make sure that we do the best we possibly can in all areas in our community where we have to worry about contaminated soil and things, and that includes the Rogers Garage area. So, you know, all of this will hopefully help us do the best we can everywhere where we have to clean up. And finally, I just want to say that I really am trying to have our community be forward thinking and think differently. And there's a place in Rhinebeck, New York called the Omega Institute that is a self-contained building that doesn't, you know, plug into the infrastructure with sewage and all that. It's a self-contained structure. And if we could design and experiment with those kinds of ideas for future designing of buildings to replace old designs, I think it would be worth using that spot to think experimentally. And again, I just really applaud the fire district for doing the best job they could in containing things.
Thank you. Is there anyone online? I think I failed to say, please raise your hand or press *9, but it doesn't sound like there's anyone watching. Okay. All right. Do we have any other discussion on this item before I move on?
Can I just ask how many fire hydrants were running during this?
I think we were utilizing 5 fire hydrants all at once during the peak of the fire, so that was quite a bit.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you all for presenting, in particular Chief Emmons and APD and all your sister agencies for coming out. I think we all really appreciate the work that you do and did. Thank you. With that, I'm going to move on to our next item, which is an update on the regional housing needs allocation methodology. Thank you again for coming in.
Yeah, I'm going to take 2 minutes to get the PowerPoint set up. Okay. I'm ready whenever you are.
All right, I think we're ready. Everyone, David is going to present now. Peter, David's going to present now.
Order in the court. Okay, thank you very much. And so just to start, I wanted to acknowledge that on the agenda, it did say that we were going to provide a RHNA update, otherwise known as ARENA update. And I have to apologize when the agenda was coming together, Mads, our admin specialist, said, "What are the agenda's items?" And I said, "I'm going to give an update on the ARENA." And so that's what was published in our agenda. And so I expect a lot of things of our staff, but I don't expect them to be able to read my mind. And so I do apologize for having that acronym. It does stand for the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So in part, this presentation is to provide a quick update to the Planning Commission on the methodology that's been adopted. This came out of a request of the chair that I bring this back, but I also think it's timely because we have, for the first time in the 3 or 4 cycles that I've been working on housing elements, we're actually experiencing an appeal to the RENA methodology. So I'll talk a little bit about that too and update you as to where we're at with that and what the city's proposing to do about it. In background, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation is the first step in the housing element process. The Humboldt County Association of Governments, or HCOG, is responsible for coordinating, facilitating the RENA process, which involves bringing all of the planning agencies together to discuss how best to split up the share of housing units that the state says the region needs to provide during the next housing element cycle, and then develops a method, gets that approved by their board, submits it to Housing and Community Development, or HCD, for their review. So we went through that exact process. And in fact, we added a step. All of the jurisdictions, after going through the planning meeting where all of the planning divisions got together and talked about how best we thought we could meet the state objectives for these housing needs and then also our local jurisdictions objectives, we then took that methodology to each of our respective boards or councils and had them weigh in on that. And so ultimately, the regional recommendation for the RENA process was one that involved not just a staff level, but also an agency board level review.
David, could I just quickly ask?
Please.
The region is Humboldt County?
The region, yeah, for our region, the region is Humboldt County. Many council of governments cover multiple jurisdictions, multiple counties, but we are, because we're not a metropolis planning organization, we are just a county-wide council of governments. So the methodology that I'm showing you here on the screen is the method that all of the agencies approved at their board levels. In effect, what it did was it took the total number, which I'll note was higher than it's been in my entire career. So for this 8-year period, we're supposed to provide about 6,962, about 6,000 units, 5,962 units throughout the region, and divide those over the different jurisdictions. The way that we agreed to do that was to use the statutory requirements of the proportion of jobs and balancing that with the population, or the jobs housing balance. And for our area, we feel that is a rough approximation for a lot of the other factors that jurisdictions can consider when adopting the RENA methodology. And in fact, for our jurisdiction, the planning teams also felt that it was a good approximation for some of the new requirements that came out in this RENA cycle. And I'll talk about those in a minute. When we applied this 50% regional jobs, 50% regional population weighting to the overall numbers to divide them across the different income categories from acutely low, a new income category, to above moderate. And I'm going to breeze over these a little bit, but if you have questions about what these categories mean, please let me know. But the idea here is that each jurisdiction gets some number of units in each income category through this process. We would apply an adjustment factor based on the agency's performance for affordable housing in the past. And so the intent behind the regional housing needs allocation process, the intent behind housing elements, largely is to ensure that there's a fair distribution across the entire region for affordable housing. So no matter what jurisdiction you live in or what jurisdiction you wish to live in, that there's affordable housing available to you, and that every jurisdiction is taking that responsibility instead of just cordoning off affordable housing or lower income housing in just certain areas of the area covered by the Council of Governments. This was the method that we used last RHNA cycle, and after getting together and kicking around several different options for modifying it, we made the recommendation to go with this same balance this time. This was supported by our city council and the other councils, as I mentioned. We went through that process. We gave HCOG executive director our recommendations. He went to the board. The board of HCOG approved this methodology, and we sent it to the Housing Community Development Department. They came back and said, you didn't do a good enough job addressing affirmatively furthering fair housing. Affirmatively furthering fair housing is a new element to RHNA process that is required in state law. And HCD has some tools that they recommend that jurisdictions use in order to evaluate how best to allocate based on that affirmatively furthering fair housing. In essence, what it means, or what the result of that method is intended to do, is to distribute more lower income housing to areas that are higher resourced. So if you're in a jurisdiction that has better schools, better bus, better opportunity for shopping and jobs, we want more lower income housing to go into that jurisdiction using affirmatively furthering fair housing. At the same time, there are requirements for balancing a host of other competing interests. One would be greenhouse gas reductions. And the way that we've typically done that through the regional housing needs allocation process is by weighting jurisdictions that have lower vehicle miles traveled associated with the relationship between their jobs and housing. So you have a high proportion of jobs, you have a high proportion of housing, you have a low VMT, you get more allocated to your jurisdiction because of that. We believe that this method that was approved bakes that in, and it's primarily because there's really two population centers. There's the city of Eureka and the city of Arcata, and then the county. And the county is largely clustered around the cities in outlying areas around McKinleyville, Cutton, and et cetera. And so we believe, based on local knowledge, that this method actually embeds both affirmatively furthering fair housing and reducing VMT. The state didn't buy that argument, and we made the pitch a couple of times, and instead of bucking their wisdom, we decided to come up with a couple of new methods. I'll share two of them because, and I'm sorry, I'm striking out the word previous preferred alternative. This slide was taken from the HCOG presentation when they were bringing these back. I wouldn't say that this isn't the previous preferred alternative. This was the approved alternative. And again, just looking at the numbers, for the city of Arcata, we're talking a total of 1,000 units that we'd have to plan for in the next 8 years. Eureka, 1,700. So that's, with the county, the principal number of units in total, 4,000 and change there. So we tried to, come up with alternatives that were different and distinct from one another. Alternative number two used the 50-50 balance because we had all agreed on that, but then it put in a heavier load on VMT, so work-based VMT. So those are trips specifically from home to work, not taking into consideration all the other trips that people might make in a day, trying to reduce that VMT. And then also using this opportunity score, which was the affirmatively furthering fair housing component. So alternative 2 put higher emphasis on VMT, nearly double the emphasis on VMT, and then also included an affirmatively furthering fair housing. And then that essentially would assign agencies, based on high income housing. The alternative 3, which was the alternative that the planning group ultimately settled on a recommendation to the HCOG, largely because it mirrored what the boards across the region had already approved in the first methodology that the board of HCOG had already approved in their first methodology. But it explicitly included an opportunity score, so affirmatively furthering fair housing, work-based VMT, and then regional income parity. Excuse me. These 3 factors helped to create a little bit more of a balance towards affirmatively furthering fair housing and recognizing those jurisdictions like the city of Arcata that have historically done a very good job of providing for affordable housing for our community. So our recommendation was to stick with alternative 3. It did what the state wanted us to do. It did what the jurisdictions had already approved. It did what the HCOG had already approved. When the, we're going to go over this cell by cell, so buckle your seatbelts. When this again is data that were presented to the HCOG board when they made their determination for the revised RENA methodology. And I'm going to focus you in on a couple of pieces, but what you're looking at here, if you want to stare at the screen, is each jurisdiction, the quote unquote previous or approved methodology, options 1, which I did not go over, option 2, and option 3, which I just went over for each jurisdiction. The total number is still the same because we're allocating the same number of units, but with these different methodologies, as you'll see, there's a different share of the various income categories depending on which methodology we use. The staff recommendation was to use methodology 3. Ultimately, methodology 2 was adopted.
I feel like I should disclose that I was a public commenter at this meeting, like vociferously arguing for methodology 2 over methodology 3.
I think you should do your ex parte when the time comes.
Okay.
And it's not truly ex parte because it's not a quasi judicial, but I think it's good for you to disclose what happened there. So method 2 is what HCOG ultimately approved. And you can see the comparison between the approved method originally and method 2 for the city of Arcata. It made, minor modifications, slight increase in the total number of lower income units, a slight decrease in the total number of higher income units. And on balance, we started with 529 in the approved method. We ended with 586, so we got several more units, mostly in the higher income category. Our representative for the COG was less concerned about having higher income requirements. I think what we've been hearing lately is that we've done a really good job on low income, not that we need to take the foot off the pedal for that, but that we also need to concentrate on high income. And so this was consistent with what the City of Arcata's council had approved. And you can see method 3 would have generated roughly the same number, a difference of 5 for the City of Arcata. Eureka was not present, was not represented at this meeting by their COG board member. The Director of Community Services, my counterpart in the City of Arcata in Eureka, was in attendance and spoke on the matter as well. You can see from method 2 to the approved method for the city of Eureka, acutely low income is roughly the same, but they're picking up units in low income, and they're picking up units in very low income, and they're picking up units, extremely low, low, and low income. Their numbers in their moderate and high income went down. So they pick up units in low income, and their higher income units go down. Their overall units go up pretty substantially relative to where they would have been with method 3 or with the previously approved method. Not going to go through each jurisdiction. I'm just going to focus on these two because Eureka ultimately made an appeal of the decision of the COG. So the COG approved this method 2. Eureka has appealed it. We'll talk a little bit about what that means in just a moment. Right now, in fact. Please.
Can you go back to I'm not understanding something here for Arcata. It seems like we have a smaller number of above moderate in method 2, right?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. In fact, moderate and above moderate went down. I misspoke just a moment ago.
All right. Is that something that we're in favor of in Arcata?
You know, I'm going to be real frank. The numbers for this RENA cycle are so ludicrously high that no one is expecting that we're ever going to meet them in the first place. And so to have a target that is ridiculously high, the fact that the numbers bounce around a little bit is, in particular in the higher income units, is less important to us.
Okay. It's always seemed to me that housing for people, for example, associated with the university would be important for Arcata. We have a lot of people at the university who live in Eureka or McKinleyville because they can't find a place in Arcata. And I think it would be advantageous if they could.
I 100% agree with you. And I think that the planning work that we just did in the general plan and the gateway plan, the proactive work that we do in our housing element anyway is what's going to get us there. This distribution of units associated with the RENA methodology is not driving our policy. We've got policy that is working to support what the city of Arcata believes it needs to do, irrespective of this. That's a whole nother staff report, and I can go into that if you want to dig into it in a little bit more. But to put a pin in it, I'll just say that the numbers are literally twice what they are this current housing element cycle. And so the city of Arcata has done a bang-up job. If you compare us to almost anyone in the state, we're probably in the top 5%. We've been doing really good at meeting our RENA. The RENA is a floor, it's not a ceiling. So jurisdictions can always target higher than the RENA, but with a RENA as large as this, double what our current cycle is, there's just no way possible that I can envision that we're actually going to meet this. If we do, I will certainly eat my words. But it's gone far beyond a planning process and has entered the territory of a planning spectacle. Part of the reason why we have these numbers is because the new RENA methodology, I'm sorry, I said I wasn't going to go into it, so I'm going to pause. I'm going to put the pin in it. If you want to know more, please ask. Any other questions before we go on?
Sorry if I could jump in. We've met it for our low income and below, but we haven't met our targets, correct, for above and moderate. Is that?
That's correct. We're doing really well in the lower income. We're doing pretty well in moderate, and we're about halfway there with our above moderate for the current cycle. And we've had, really good development. We've had a lot of production this RENA cycle in general. Okay, so just real quick, I want to talk a little bit about what the appeal process looks like. Now, again, Eureka appealed the decision because They weren't there to be able to weigh in, and they weren't happy with the outcome. Right now, we're in a process where the COG has already delivered the original methodology in December of 2025. That was going to run through February 2026. They have the new methodology that was adopted recently, and we're in the 60-day review period for that. Unfortunately, I don't have an arrow for that process, but it's going to end in March. So this is relative. Think of this as relative. Consider that February 2026 as a March 2026. Eureka appealed during the 60-day review period. Now, typically, what happens is after HCD has responded after the 60-day, then you hold the appeal hearing. What we've asked is for the COG to evaluate whether or not we can hold the appeal hearing during the 60-day period to see what the outcome of that is, and maybe provide HCD with an update while they're in review of the currently adopted method 2. The reason for that is because we're concerned about when that appeal period happens and when that hearing might happen and how that will ultimately affect our housing element cycle, which we need to wrap up pretty much by the end of this year. And so if we delay on the front end, that gives us less time to work through our housing element process on the back end of that. Now, I will say I'm still optimistic that regardless of whether the hearing happens during the HCD review period or after it, that we'll have plenty of time to do what we need to do on our housing element cycle. But because it's an unknown, because it's an uncertainty, we're trying to push for multi-tracking these things to streamline the process as much as possible. If we do get into a situation where, we're out beyond the HCD review period and there's still ambiguity, the city's likely to start working on the elements of its update that it can without having the specific numbers and the methodology. There's a lot of, data crunching and policy work and engagement that we can do that's outside of that. So we'll look to do that.
The housing element will be, will inform the city of how we're going to meet the RENA goals?
Exactly. Yeah, so the RENA is embedded in the housing element. We take these numbers that we'll receive for the various income categories, and we'll be responsible for identifying policies, programs, and properties where we could meet that floor.
So I guess Arcata's numbers, it was like 530s for the first two and then 580s for the second two. They're all high, like you've said, right? And so we can sort of start planning for a very high number regardless of which of these methodologies is chosen, right? Is that sort of where you're getting to? Because I feel like that might be the right way to handle this situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We know we have a large number. We know our number is going to be around 1,000. And so, we can start planning for that, but there are different policies that you have to have in place for, and you have to demonstrate properties to meet the various income categories. And so without knowing exactly how many we need to meet, there's no reason to begin that process.
David, you mentioned that you thought these goals were unrealistic.
Yes.
If that's the case, I mean, are we going to plan for them even though they seem undoable?
Yes, and that's a really good segue into the last point I want to make on this. We are required to plan for them, even though they are ludicrously high. We are required to do this, and if we don't do it, we don't get a certified housing element. And if we don't get a certified housing element, there's all kinds of transportation funds and housing funds and grants and other, funds that we get from the state that we're not eligible to receive. In addition, jurisdictions that don't have certified housing elements, trigger, the ire of the Attorney General. They trigger the ire of HCD. They're subject to builder's remedy projects and all kinds of Housing Accountability Act laws that we've studied as we were going through the general plan process, updating our housing policy. all of those things that we've always been safely, secured from because we were doing really good at being proactive in housing development, we would be subject to if we can't find ways to meet these housing numbers. So yeah, it's of critical importance that we meet them in our housing element, and it's critically important that, we support the other jurisdictions in the region to meet these as well. And the reason why I said that was a good segue into the last point I wanted to make is because the difference between alternative 2 and alternative 3, in my opinion, and I have a feeling our chair may express a different opinion based on his comments to the HCOG board, is that with alternative 2, we have a heavy emphasis on VMT, which only is realized if those units are built. Our VMT doesn't change if we don't build any units. Our VMT doesn't change by much if we don't build many of those units. And frankly, even if we built all of those units, the overall impact on greenhouse gases from VMT, I think, is limited. But even if it isn't limited, I stand by the idea that we're highly unlikely to build that many units. So on the side of the scale that weighs towards alternative 2 and an emphasis on VMT, we have a policy objective and a goal to meet greenhouse gases. Whereas on alternative 3, on the balance scale for alternative 3, where it balances VMT with these other factors and yields a somewhat more attainable goal, we have the opportunity to have certified housing elements. And so not certifying your housing element, not being able to find those sites for those very low-income individuals, very low-income households, results in real-world impacts on day one. So that's, I guess, in both of those, I want to acknowledge, are a little theoretical. There's a little bit of a tissue tiger in both of them, but the alternative 3 was, in terms of the overall process, alternative 3 was what we had already, as jurisdictions, had applied. So I'd like to turn it over for questions and certainly deliberation.
Yeah, this seems a little like fantasy land. I mean, if these goals are truly unrealistic, they're going to be unrealistic for everyone, not just Arcata. I mean, they're going to be unrealistic for everyone else in the county. What's the state going to do when people are trying to reach unrealistic goals and failing?
That is the big question. That's one of the big questions we're asking the state. And so, and we're not the only ones. I think, there were some dramatic changes to the RENA process this time around. And some of the changes are, well-intentioned, but in practicality, far off the mark in terms of being able to, implement them. So yeah, I do question, what is the state going to do, when no one can certify their housing element or they're not being able to meet these objectives?
Do you have a sense that the skew is in favor of more areas that have urban sprawl as an opportunity, or more metropolitan areas? Are we, as a rural county that's particularly in Arcata, well, the whole county, we're so restricted by the ocean, by the redwoods, by all the stuff we've always talked about here, farmland, urban sprawl is just not an opportunity. Do you feel like we're at a disadvantage and that there's some kind of nudge towards, incorporate more area? I don't know, figure it out.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, universally when I talk to people across the state and jurisdictions, the first thing out of their mouth when it comes to this topic is, we're built out. Every jurisdiction is built out. When you look at the city of Arcata, I think a lot of people would look at it from somewhere in LA where I grew up, and they'd be saying, you guys have tons of area. What are you worried about? You can just annex all that land around you. We have pretty strong policies suggesting we don't annex the land around us. We have strong policies suggesting that we don't, build out into the forest, and that we have, strong infill policies. And the city of Arcata is not the only one. The city of Eureka has taken on, similar policies. And I feel like, in general, the region is going that direction. All of the cities in our region have lands outside of them, but we're also a very, rough terrained county that isn't real easy or wise to build on necessarily. And so we come back down to the same kinds of infill policies that, major metropolitan areas or, the big cities are dealing with as well. And I think, I do want to, kind of transition a little bit, because these numbers are unrealistic. We have our challenges. We feel, like the state policy isn't, taking into consideration our needs. But the reality is that we just got done with a radical planning process that really identified what this community needs to do, what it believes it needs to satisfy its housing and, economic development challenges. And I think that, jurisdictions are going to have to continue to rely on that, because regardless of what, state policy is implemented for what reason, regardless of the penalties or the hooks or the ties associated with that, I think if we can continuously show that we are actually actively trying to implement pro-housing policies. I mean, I want to remind the council and the community, or the planning commission and the community, that the city of Arcata is one of 33 jurisdictions that won the HUD Pro-Housing grant. And we're actively implementing that grant right now to increase the ability for builders to be able to build what we need them to build, to make it easier to build what we need them to build. And so regardless of these numbers, and regardless of our constraints, I think we have to, continue to focus on what we can do as local jurisdictions to meet our needs.
Thanks, David. I appreciate all of this in-depth conversation on this. I guess I'm kind of curious around the relationship to Cal Poly and kind of their, how they kind of are building housing, and they seem to be purchasing land all around Arcata, which not only removes it from Arcata to be able to build on, but it takes it out of the ability to count our RENA numbers towards. And I wonder if there's any conversations around this with Cal Poly at all, because I know they obviously have their own intention and needs to build housing. But I also kind of continue to see them purchasing land around Arcata. So
yeah, we're in regular communication and collaboration with Cal Poly. Obviously they don't disclose to us or ask us when they decide to buy a piece of property, but there were a couple of acquisitions that they made that reduced our housing stock. There were acquisitions in Rio Del that reduced our housing stock when Cal Fire purchased a property that they had relied on in their housing element for new housing and meeting their RENA goals. And I think this is one of the areas that is kind of at a policy level a little bit broader, because the state is mandating housing. We need to have some kind of relief or some kind of consideration when the state then comes and takes that housing stock away from us. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but that's something that we're working on with our legislators right now, and trying to promote, with the agencies like, Cal Cities and Institute of Local Government, folks that, have, some legislative sway, just so that is considered, when making these decisions. So yeah, I would say we're definitely in regular communication with Cal Poly, and we recognize that they're a huge economic engine for the city of Arcata, and also a critical partner when it comes to the vibrancy and quality of life in the city of Arcata. Bringing students and the faculty, the staff. It's it's a good partnership, and I'd say we're in regular communication, but we don't drive their decision-making process. That's something that needs to be done sort of at the legislative level.
Are there any other questions? Clarifying questions? All right, I'm going to open up this item for public comment. If anyone would like to make a public comment, you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Joanne McGarry, and appreciate your saying what the RHNA stands for. I do think the word ludicrous is appropriate in terms of looking at these numbers. And it's been interesting. Just on the streets, I'm having conversations with various people, small business owners and others who are, renters and tenants, who say that the population of our county is decreasing, and even in our city perhaps, and yet the demand by the state for increasing. I mean, it's just all a very interesting a mix of numbers and data and opinions and wants or whatever. But I was at a Board of Supervisors meeting this morning, and Supervisor Wilson, who represents us, was basically talking after DHHS was talking about the challenges of homelessness and housing. And he was basically saying it's wealth inequality that is really, really interesting. So when you look at numbers where we need to build more houses for poor people and less houses for people who aren't as poor or wealthier people, it's all just a really interesting dynamic. And you've got professionals up at the university, and the future with our climate action plan. All these factors taking into consideration, I appreciate the challenge that is presented here with trying to get the state to understand us better, as opposed to, shoving something down our throats that is really, really hard to swallow. So I just want to say that I appreciate sticking around and looking at these numbers and understanding the challenges, but the future has to be that parity type thing is important, and vehicle miles traveled is important. But who's going to tell somebody who lives up in McKinleyville or Trinidad and works at the university that it's more important that they stay in town for their jobs? That's going to be a really interesting. Vehicle miles traveled to the workplace and home is going to be an interesting thing to try and implement. So just appreciate being here to try and understand this better.
Is there anyone online? Oh, okay. I thought maybe someone was waiting this whole time to comment on Rena.
Amanda is online, but she's not raising her hand to speak. She's listening in.
Okay, I feel obligated to say a couple of things. The first is that, the number was high to begin with. And so what we're fighting over is how to allocate that number between jurisdictions in the county. And my concern about sprawl was that some of the methodologies gave a much larger amount to the unincorporated county. And so if you tell the unincorporated county you have to build 2,000 units of housing, it's more difficult for them to do that in an infill way. It's possible. They're trying to do it in McKinleyville now with their plan, but I think it's less likely to happen in the unincorporated county. The second thing I just want to say is, my understanding of why the number is so much higher this cycle is that they added a consideration of the percentage of people in our community that are rent burdened, right? So if you have housing, but you're paying more than, I think, 30% of your income on rent or your mortgage, so they added a consideration of that, and they added a consideration of our current unhoused population. The prior cycles didn't consider those two things when thinking about how much housing we need. And so, we can disagree about the total number, but I just want to defend HCD a little bit in the sense that, those are important factors to consider when saying how much housing does a community need. Are the people able to afford rent, and how many unhoused people are there? And so those are just two clarifications I wanted to make for the 7 people listening to me right now. But, I felt that I had to.
May I? Because I totally agree. I think those are important variables to bake into the methodology. HCD also incorporated basically a factor that took into consideration your jurisdiction's median housing price compared with the national housing median price. And that's what I mean. I think all of these were really well-intentioned ideas. And the intent is to try and reduce the housing costs for local communities, which I think we all appreciate, and to increase the housing stock, which we also all appreciate. I just think that when that number, there maybe should have been like a cap or something that, once you get past a certain number that, evaluated like, what is this? What has been the housing production? What is the possible theoretical housing production of a community? I just, I struggle to imagine that we're going to build 6,000 units in this county in the next 8 years. I think the last time we did that was probably post-war.
Yeah. The requirement is to plan for and not necessarily construct the units, right? It's to...
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, this is part of my frustration with the recent housing bills that were being adopted towards the end of our planning process for the general plan and the Gateway Area Plan. We had just invested all of this energy, all of this creative energy, all of this community energy, all this engagement energy into creating this glorious new planning document that was going to lift our community up and let us do it our way to meet the requirements of the state. And then the state just raced right on by us. And now a lot of that planning work is for naught, because if we're not meeting our goals, then a builder's remedy project could come in and tell us we're building whatever we want to build. Or a density bonus project could come in and tell us, your standards are nice, but we're not interested in using them because we're gonna, do a density bonus project. And so, not that those things are bad inherently. It's just that, when some jurisdictions dig in their heels and, try and avoid doing what, state policy would say is their obligation at all costs. And I look at a, community like ours, community like many in our COG that, have been really proactive in trying to create housing, and yet we're going to be penalized just like everyone else who's been dragging their heels. So that part is frustrating.
May I ask, David, is it at the end of 8-year cycle that those kind of consequences could be leveraged?
No, they happen in quarter increments. So if you haven't met 25% of your housing allocation at quarter of the way through, they start triggering.
So 2 years from the application of our housing element.
Correct.
I think what I'm kind of balking at here is the number that's been allocated to the unincorporated county. I understand that it sounds like quite a lift for Arcata. But I'm, again, I think overall you're saying these numbers seem quite high, and I'm just kind of scratching my head thinking, okay, in general, we're a county that's really committed or supposedly committed to infill projects. And, just thinking about that number in unincorporated county, I understand that McKinleyville is doing quite a bit of work with the town center planning and everything. But, what is that? What message is this sending towards kind of sprawling development towards the larger community? And I know that's not necessarily like a specific concern of Arcata, but, in the conversations with the larger county or the HCOG in general. I don't know that I really have a question, just kind of like this does seem like a conundrum. And I also feel kind of excited and like maybe mildly inspired to not only as a, planning commissioner, but also a local architect to kind of begin to think through some of these creative ways that Arcata can, I don't know, like think about potentially getting closer to some of these numbers, whether or not it's like fully achievable or realistic. I think sometimes outlandish ideas, pave interesting ways for, I think creativity is available. And I don't know what that looks like in this process, but, I think rather than completely dismissing it, I think it could be a fun opportunity for fun engagement of community and businesses.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And that's where I think it gets back to creativity is exactly the word that I've been using when I talk to folks about this. And that we need to be creative and figure out how we meet these goals that sit well with our community, that accomplish our objectives, that that are driven by the policies that we decide. We don't have the option to appeal this large number. We tried to work with Department of Finance and HCD to get them to rethink this. That was a non-starter. So we have our marching orders. I don't necessarily like them, but I think to your point, I think we need to meet this creatively. There's a pessimistic part of me that thinks that there's almost no way we're going to do this. And I will happily eat my words if we do, because, I do think that there's great housing need out there. It's just what I've seen in the market, what I see in the market right now wouldn't predict that we're going to have some kind of a huge boon in housing development just because we have this big number sitting on a page in a document somewhere in our general plan.
Yeah.
I'm sure hopeful that in this tragic loss of half a block of downtown Arcata that we'll see more than 7 apartments in the rebuild.
I am hopeful too. I think there's a great opportunity there, and some real interest. And one of the things that I'm inspired by about our community is, as mentioned before, the way we rallied together. But the other thing that I'm really inspired by is this type of devastating impact on your property could be something that you basically just throw your hands up and decide to walk away from. But most of the property owners are really engaged and interested, and so I'm thinking about, like, what do I do next? And that's inspiring to me.
I think that was an excellent concluding thought, unless anyone else has any further comments. Okay. With that, oh, yeah, go ahead, Deb. Oh, no, sorry. With that, I'm going to close that item, and we'll move on to correspondence and communications. Is there any correspondence from planning commissioners? Seeing none. Any correspondence from staff?
I have a few, and these are just quick ones. First, the Planning Commission annual report will be coming to you at your next regular meeting on January 27th. And I just want to put out there that the City Council will be reviewing that annual report on February 4th. Typically, the chair presents that, so be prepared for that. I also wanted to let the Planning Commission know that way back in September, I think it was, when we were last looking at the local coastal program update, we continued our hearing. And we continued that hearing to February 17th, which happens to be not a regular Planning Commission meeting date. So what I'd like you to think about, and then email me afterwards, because we can't make a decision during communications, but if you could make a special meeting, let me know. And we'll schedule a special meeting for the 17th. If you can't make a special meeting on the 17th, then I'll show up on the 17th and I'll adjourn the hearing to the regular meeting date the following week. So I apologize for that confusion.
David, what day of the week is that?
It's Tuesday. So I got at least the day of the week right. I just got the wrong Tuesday back in September when I was looking at it. So we would be continuing that to your regular meeting on the 24th. If we do that. And then I did mention this earlier, but I'm going to mention it again for correspondence and communications, is that Commissioner Hickey's reappointment is being considered by the City Council on January 21st. That's next Wednesday. And then lastly, the Historic Landmarks Committee annual report will be presented to the Council on February 18th, assuming that they meet this month. And so I'll update you at your next meeting. If they don't meet this month, we won't have the opportunity to put their annual report together, but you may be interested in listening to their annual report when they give it. I'll keep you apprised. That's all I have.
Great. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.